going to be?
So I think I'll start by introducing you, and then you'll read, and well, I'll say that in the introduction. So
remind me, Natasha, about how long do you like your readings to be?
What, 20 minutes, I think, online, around
we'll
that.
Q&A? Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So my name is Natasha Sayeh. It's my pleasure to direct the Ann Newman Sutton Weeks Poetry Series at Westminster College. I'd like to thank all of you for being here in this virtual space with us. And I would also like to thank the Salt Lake County Zoo Arts and Parks Program for a grant that enables us to enrich our offerings. And thank you for your patience as I transfer the series online. Shara will read for about 20 minutes and then respond to your written questions and comments, which you can put in the chat. My colleague Eileen Chanza Torres will be monitoring the chat for your missives. At the very end of our time together, I'll ask you to unmute yourselves so we can applaud Shara and she can hear it. Shara McCallum was born in Jamaica of Rastafarian parents, an Afro-Jamaican father and a Venezuelan mother. She emigrated to the US at age 9. She's the author of 6 books of poetry published in the US and the UK. Madwoman, the winner of several book prizes, is the book I chose to teach this semester. To be mad might mean to be insane or angry or exaggerated. And in this book, Shara creates a character who is some or all of those things in fabulous combination. And I use that word fabulous in its etymological sense. Shara's next book, No Ruined Stone, imagines Robert Burns in Scotland and Jamaica and will be published next year. Her work has appeared widely around the globe and has been translated into many languages. She is the recipient of a Witter Bynner Fellowship from the US Library of Congress and an NEA, National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, among other awards. She's taught at Bucknell and the University of the West Indies, as well as in low-residency programs, and is now a professor at Penn State. Like the poet Louise Gluck, McCallum is predominantly metaphorical. Her mythic worlds are often conjured in the process of questioning memory. But unlike Gluck, McCallum's myths are not always Freudian. Rather, they encompass folklore and fairy tales. Shara returns to her subjects, but she also dramatically rewrites them. She is a most inventive formalist, which makes her poems especially fun to teach because poetry is above all an art form. Shara McCallum's use of patois, what Kamal Brathwaite calls nation language, gives her poems yet another texture. I can't wait to hear them in her voice. Shara.
Thank you so much, Natasha. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here, but especially honored by Natasha Sayeh's invitation. She knows this, that I read her first book, Red Under the Skin, years and years and years ago before we ever met. Loved it so, so much and have continued to love her work ever since. She's a marvelous poet, as many of you know. And so I'm really delighted to be here in the good company of all of you. I'm going to read and just not say too much between the poems, I think, for the 20 minutes. And then I'm happy to say as much about the poems or anything else you want to talk about after. Memory. I bruise the way the most secreted, most tender part of a thigh exposed, purples, then blues. No spit-shine shoes, I'm dirt. You can't wash from your feet. Wherever you go, know I'm the wind, accosting the trees, the howling night of your sea. Try to leave me, I'll pin you between a rock and a hard place. Will hunt you, even as you erase your tracks with the tail ends of your skirts. You think I'm gristle, begging to be chewed? No, my love, I'm bone. Rather, the sound bone makes when it snaps. That ditty, lingering in you like ruin.
On NFL Network.
I'm going to try to read all the poems that I recall that the students talked about or asked for, and memory was one of those. So this sequence of poems starts with the poem that Jacob asked for, Madwoman Exiled, and then I'm going to read a couple more, which includes a poem in Rastafarian English and a poem another student talked about, who I can't remember her name now, but it's O Abuse. And they form a little interesting trilogy for tonight, I think. Madwoman Exiled. Walking from the house of my earliest dreams, I passed the field where I collected cerasee to boil into tea. Past my birth tree, its roots and my umbilical cord entwined. Next town I enter, I will kneel on the steps of the first church I find. Plant myself in the path of parishioners who turn from me, tipping their faces to a blistering sky. Day upon day, I will sink my hair into a pail. Whore of Babylon, abomination, I will take matted strands to stone, scouring for all who must see to see the scourge in me he left. There's one thing I do need to say about this next poem before I read it. It's a little challenging, I'm realizing, to figure out where to put my book. So if you see me looking off, that's why. Madwoman as Rasta Medusa is a poem that this came to me in this woman's voice, and I really had to try to figure out what about the story of Medusa was worth recasting as a Rasta. And one part of it I just want to tell you while you're listening. I don't want to wait for the Q&A for this. In case you don't remember the story of Medusa, I know we all know her and who she is, but often it's forgotten how she became a Gorgon. And I will just tell you in brief, it was her punishment for getting herself raped. That's correct. She was punished for being raped. Madwoman as Rasta Medusa. I, woman, go turn all of Babylon to stone. I, woman, is the deliverer and the truth. Look pon I and feel ye inside calcify. Look pon I and witness the chasm, the abyss of yourself rupture. Look pon I and know what bring destruction. You say, I, woman, is monstrosity, but is your gravelicious ways make I come the way I come? Is your belief everyone exists to satisfy your wantonness? You think all these years gone, I, woman, I come here for revenge? Well, yo, but it's wrong. Again, you're wrong. I, woman, is the reckoning and judgment day. This face, etched with wretchedness, these dreads writhing and hissing misery, is not the terror. I, woman, is what birthed from your terror. And in a very different register, but dealing with the same issue, abuse. When I try to locate you, I think maybe you are lodged in my scapula like ill-formed wings. When I listen for your voice, I hear a faint lullaby of razors and knives though fainter. You are my first darkness, but I continue wanting to see you as a sapling, greening and tendriling. I am perhaps naive enough to believe if I could unlock your origin, I would glean knowledge of what separates a spirit from itself, would understand what makes each of us sometimes that creature of no good, of pure whatlessness. O abuse, you swallowed the sun when you came, but also taught me it never shines for any one of us exactly. A gift I have thanked you for many a time since. So no, I am not calling you here to account for your sins. What use would that be to either of us, travelers landed so far from where we began? No, I am asking you to step into the light so I may behold your face. Or please, when I speak the only name for you I have, please, just once, answer. The book ranges all over the place in terms of voice, tone, subject matter. And because we talked about the ghazal today in the workshop that I was delighted to get to visit, both of Natasha's classes have been a great treat to get to visit and talk with the students who are so smart. And I want to read this poem, even though I know many of you are not going to be intimately familiar with the subject of it, which is motherhood. But I hope you can just imagine something of the refrain as you're listening to this and anticipate it in the way that we talked about the ghazal maybe invites. So if you feel so inclined and you pick up the rhyme and the refrain, I won't mind if you sing along. Now I'm a mother. What does the world look like? Sublime, you ask, now I'm a mother? Sometimes, but thing is, I also suck limes, now I'm a mother. Watch me whirl, a spinning top, a kaleidoscope, universe of hurry. Always in a flurry, I'm anxiety's mime, now I'm a mother. Everything I've said and done has come back to bite me in the ass. Humility's what I'm learning, time after time, now I'm a mother. You hear the same laments on talk shows, in self-help books, at water coolers. I was too blind, young, foolish to see. I was in my prime. Now I'm a mother. My friend expounds, each of you are remote, a theory based on his own mother. I can't help wondering, is loneliness my crime? Now I'm a mother? In the end, I couldn't keep up the charade. My child figured out I was no god. What a relief. It was exhausting, perfection's climb. Now I'm a mother. Nothing about it is sublime. You try again. Younger version of me, take heart. Of course there are days that chime a perfect rhyme. Now I'm a mother. My real name's dispenser of Band-Aids, but call me Earth if you would rather. It's all the same to me. Even Shara is just a pseudonym. Now I'm a mother. So maybe I'll just read a couple more, and I will flip to another of the free verse sonnets. So that first poem I started with, Memory, is a free verse sonnet. And this is one of the very last poems in the book, before the very last poem, which is a long poem. The book is also an elegy. And the time frame in which I was writing it, it's an elegy for many things, many aspects of self, but it's also specifically for the people who brought me to the United States and were largely responsible for my upbringing and who I am, my grandparents, and they died in quick succession. While I was dealing with that grief, I wrote this sonnet, Grief. I linger rearranging the furniture, making the sky contract till it no longer contains the horizon. When I hover, you hear cicadas crescendo. You mistake me for winter's onset or the body as it ages. Foolish girl, you console yourself with fables where straw is spun to gold. But a promise remains unpaid. Have you really not yet learned? Only in fairy tales is disaster averted with a secret word. In this world, magic claims no dominion. Death is a door which keeps opening. I'm sorry, that is very dark. I just realized as I'm reading it that it's very dark. I think maybe I could have time to read a few more. I mistimed our start, Natasha. I wasn't accounting for the few minutes of waiting and all that. So when I looked down and I saw it was 9:20, my time, I thought, oh no, I better wrap it up. But
Nope.
I don't want to, yeah?
We have another 5 minutes at least. Yep.
Okay, because that feels like very terrible to end there, you
Yeah.
know? And so I need to get us away from that now. This is my idea of a love poem. I spoke about the love poem and its long tradition and my belief on some basic level that all poems really are about are two things, love and loss. And this one is about both because that's the kind of love poem I know how to write. It's about also a painting, so it's an ekphrastic poem. And I'm happy to tell you what that is if you don't know in our Q&A. But in the interim, to give you something to do with your technology, if you would like, you can look up the painting that this poem is responding to. It's a beautiful painting by Marc Chagall. And if you don't know Marc Chagall's work, he's one of my very favorites. And this painting is called The Dream. So the poem is called The Dream, after Chagall and for Steve. In a house that is not a house, but a boat set sailing, in a landscape where darkened clouds and hills merge, and an angel hovers and a rooster like a sentinel guards. Or inside that house, where a man consoles a woman, standing next to the bed where she sits, a vase of flowers on the table at their side. Love, find us. And find us inside the farmhouse we rented, which all winter let in cold and mice through cracks in its stone, where across the field, outside our window, deer trekked, leaving tracks in snow. As lying in bed, we watched. If love is not this dream of itself, then it must be awaking to this dream. If it is not a place in time, then it must be the action of placing a vase of flowers deliberately on a table inside a square of light. And I'll just read two more. I'm trying to decide which order to read them in. I usually don't make up my playlist. I'm not that kind of a poet. I sort of feel it as I go. So I think I'm gonna just read the Patwa one first. It's a little kind of funny, sort of. And then I'm gonna end with the poem that is, for me, the closest I come as a poet to actual singing now. So I used to be a singer, I love to sing. But first, the parable of shit and flowers. And just to say, this is about as hopeful as I know how to be, people. The parable of shit and flowers. I not the Lord. If I turn the other cheek, is my ass them going get? You, from time you was little bit. You pick up one ugly bug and call it beautiful. You stop for chat with every sorefoot man in the street. Even how you's big woman, come in like you forget what people can do. Gal, you're too trusting. I did tell you that long time, but I see now you're hard of hearing. You're ignorant, so to me don't know what to do with you. You don't even watch news. Stick your head in sand like ostrich. Child, life not easy for true. You choose for believe is only better roves. But hear me, I did grow them. And what you have to put in dirt stink to ras, but it's what make them come up. Yes, that is my election poem, people. Enough said. She. I suppose I have no idea who the she is, so please don't ask me. She could sing the blue out of water. She could sing the meat off a bone. She could sing the fire out of burning. She could sing a body out of home. She could sing the eye out of a hurricane. She could sing the fox right out its hole. She could sing the devil from the details. She could sing the lonely from a soul. She could sing a lesson in a yardstick. She could sing the duppy out of night. She could sing the shoeless out of homesick. She could sing a wrong out of a right. She could sing the prickle from the nettle. She could sing the sorrow out of stone. She could sing the tender from the bitter. She could sing the never out of gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Shara. That was beautiful. We already have a question.
Okay.
I'm assuming I could say names. So this question is actually from Ron John. There are different types of English around the world with different histories and accent. How has the tension between Jamaican English and American English influenced your writing or the way you think about language?
I think that's an excellent question. So I was exposed to first Jamaican English because that's where I grew up hearing, but Jamaican English too is a bit of a misnomer because I was exposed to Jamaican Englishes. So I was hearing various vernacular versions of Jamaican English because my parents were Rastas. That's its own kind of Jamaican English. And then there's a patois that's spoken in, Kingston that's very class-based too. So my grandparents were kind of middle class. So I was kind of going back and forth without thinking through this at the time, of course, like children don't think about this. You're absorbing all these registers of language, right? And so I think that's one kind of English that I just really feel is endemic to my poetics, right? There's also the English of poetry that I was reading, or nursery rhymes. So even before I would get to American English, where I'm going to get there, I would say that the next source of English for me was actually British nursery rhymes, because I was living in a very recently post-colonial nation. As I'm born in 72, Jamaica doesn't even become an independence until 62, right? So a lot of the things that I'm hearing are still very British. And I didn't even know that. I had this discussion in class about how ignorant I was to that, even consciously, rationally knowing it, until I lived in the UK. And I began to hear that so much of the weirdness that people would say, why is her syntax so proper or strange, or, you know, things that people who hear me talk long enough start to pick up on that's not quite American, they can't quite figure out what it is. I began to realize it wasn't just Jamaican. It was like Scots and English and and Irish, these other influences that were in my childhood I was hearing. Then, of course, there's the American. And I come to America when I'm 9. And so much of that, I think, is almost like when you learn a second language where you're in that interstitial space where your brain is still absorbing it. I feel like I must know American English just as well. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I feel like I must. The only times where I become very self-conscious about that is that I can't always tell you what's American or Jamaican anymore. So that's my long answer to this, is that I don't always know. It's other people who make me know it, because I just say things and then somebody will look at me in a way that makes me realize that's not American, is it? Right? So I don't know. As a poet, this is extraordinarily useful. I think poets are gifted with all the resources of language that are available to us, you know, and that we find striking to our ear. So.
Do you find yourself using British spelling? Or does that change with each poem?
I do, and it's, you know, it's something it's funny when you settle on something young, and then after a while, maybe it doesn't matter anymore, but you just decided. This one I really remember. I got in a big fight with my 4th grade teacher when I came to the United States about the spelling of the word color. So I was old enough to have memorized certain rules of British spelling. So the O-U-R instead of the O-R, and the I-S-E instead of the I-Z-E, I had already memorized. And I was quite insistent that my way was not wrong. It bothered me that she kept telling me it was wrong. So I went home, and we had like 3 books in my house. We had like Shakespeare, the complete unabridged Shakespeare, the King James Version of the Bible, right? And the Oxford English Dictionary. So I traipsed into school with the Oxford English Dictionary and said, this is the right spelling. And I persisted. So if you look at my English now, I go back and forth because I didn't actually keep writing in Jamaica or in a British, you know, curriculum. So I have like 3 or things I think I do still that are British, and the rest are probably all American. Yeah. And I decided when I became a poet, I wasn't erasing that either. I didn't want to make it pure. I wanted to leave that in the spelling.
That is wonderful. Next question from Dodge. When you visited Natasha's class, you mentioned that you loved the sonnet for the turn it forces you to make. What other forms of poetry do you love, and how do they contribute to your process?
I love all forms, and there isn't a form I've seen that I haven't loved, but like some of the ones that I come back to besides sonnet, I spoke about the ghazal today, and I read a ghazal. They're beautiful in their being very old forms that don't originate in English, but that English language poets have used. My introduction, I spoke about this in the workshops, the ghazal was from the Kashmiri American poet, Agha Shahid Ali. So, you know, I didn't even read first ghazals in translation, by the way. Like I wasn't reading Faiz or, you know, some of the great ghazals in the tradition. I was reading poet writing in English in the ghazal, but with that tradition coming through him, through his ancestry, history, and understanding of the form. So that's one I would point out besides the sonnet, Dodge. After that, I would say, you know, anything. I mean, Villanelle's Pantoums, blues, collage. I love collage, which is not a literary form. It is an actual visible arts form. I just choose to make it a literary form. So, you know, I just like structure. I like thinking about, as I've talked about in both the classes, really the relationship for me is between form and feeling. And when you get to the point where those are not separable from one another, that to me that's the success of a form.
Thank
Great
you.
question.
Next question from Suni Wilkinson. My husband lived in Jamaica for a couple of years and speak patois. So I love hearing you read. The presence of that music in your poetry is so warm and engaging. I agree. And your language is so rich tonally. What role do you see music playing in your poetry? How conscientious are you about employing music in your work?
So thank you for all those very generous remarks, Suni. And I'm hoping your husband enjoyed living in Jamaica. What year? I'm just curious, what year was he there? 2001. Okay, so I had already left. So I left Jamaica in 1981. But in terms of music, that's really hard to answer directly. What I'll say is that I suspect just I have a really strong ear for echoes of sound, first of all, that is to my advantage as a poet, because as much as I love image and metaphor, and I so appreciated, Natasha, what you said about that in my work, it just was so, I felt very seen by that comment that you made. I also think that I connect words to each other by sound. And so it's that interplay between sound and sense that's interesting to me. I don't know where that comes from, though. That's the harder thing to say. I could give you some guesses, but anything I'm telling you is just sort of like me making it up, right? My father was a musician and a songwriter, so I heard music from early. Maybe that. I don't know. It's hard to know why we're tipped in the direction we are. But I do love music. Eileen?
Yeah, sorry. I'm wondering, and I don't know if I'm throwing the audience of the bus and thinking less, but can you tell us what Rasta means?
Oh, of course, of course. Yes, I do need to define that, don't I? So Rasta is sometimes called Rastafari, Rastafarian, Rastafarianism. Rastafarians tend not to use ism. It's just it's a thing. You don't do that. In Rasta speak, you say ism, schism, which that's why. When people start to talk about isms, that usually means divides happen. So that's the idea there. But people refer to it as Rastafarianism because of just the way English works. I was raised as a Rasta in the 12 tribes of Israel, which is a particular branch of Rastafari in Jamaica in the 1970s, made famous notably by none other than Bob Marley. And so now you can know that you are whatever, I'll touch my screen, 1 degree of separation away from him, because he was a brother in the same church, essentially, that I grew up in. That's a very unusual phenomena. I have many sisters, none of whom are poets, by the way. So it's not just because you have this background that one writes poetry. I just want to say that. But it is a little a different worldview than people are sometimes aware of. The Rasta I was exposed to fused kind of Black intellectual traditions, freedom for Black people in the New World, sort of throwing off the shackles of colonial thinking and self-hatred that comes out of so much of colonization and slavery. So that was part of what I was getting as my worldview growing up, as well as the particular kind of notion of like peace and love and finding one's, higher power. That's another part of what I would say was the worldview I was exposed to. And then really fundamentally, tearing down Babylon. And what that means is that your job on this earth is to oppose tyranny and oppose structures that are inequitable. So that's the kind of fusing of like religious theology. There's a religious theology too, but with like political discourse and social treatises, that was my upbringing. There was also a lot of music and singing and praying, and all of which I really remember very much in snippets, So.
Thank you. Question from Samantha Paredes. When did you realize you had a knack for language, and how did you first start writing poetry?
So my first poem, and I only know this because of my mother, who very few things survived from Jamaica to Miami when we moved, like very few. But my mom kept a scrapbook. And so I was probably around maybe 5, I think. And I wrote this poem. And I'm going to share it with you, Samantha, and everyone else, because I didn't know I was going to be a poet when I wrote this. I never came back to poetry consciously until I was around 20. Okay? But I wrote this, and I've been writing this same poem my whole life. I wonder how high heaven is. I try to fly up to the sky, but down I fall again. Plop, plop. That's my first poem, my last, my everything. And if you don't know that song, I taught you about Billie Holiday earlier, people. You're my first, you're my last, my everything. Go look that song up. Your life will be better. I promise you.
That's lovely. From Bob King, where does classical mythology interlock with these experiences and with the dialects that you are using?
So classical mythology, and in terms of that, we mean in the Greek mode, right? And then the Romans, of course, took the Greek stories and built on them, just like, you know, we say Judeo-Christian, and we really mean the Jews were first, then the Christians, right? So I love all stories. I love everything that's myth in any form. But when I was in 8th grade, I was introduced to Greek myth, and it just struck a chord in me. And I don't really know why, but I just think it has to do with the fact that these wretched people were gods. And they made so much more sense to me than any other notion of God, because the notion of God is all good, but still very paternalistic, did not match up with anything I actually saw in the world. Whereas like these gods who were ridiculously flawed, they just really struck a chord in me, and they stayed with me ever since. And in particular, I think as a poet in my 20s, I began to search for masks to be able to say the things that I needed to say. Not was I able to say that then, but I can say that to you now, that I can see that that's what I was doing. Yes, I loved the stories, but I also wanted to talk about things that at the time I could not have even said the words for them, like rape or abandonment or abuse, right? I did not even know. It's a different time I came of age in people. I know this is very hard to imagine, but it wasn't something I felt I could freely say. So I could talk instead as Persephone being abducted by Hades. And then I could say all of these things because I wasn't me, Shara, I was Persephone. So I think that that's also what attracted me to this, is the safety of persona and the fearlessness of it that it engendered in me. So thank you for that question.
Before I turn to Hannah's questions, I have a follow-up. Is then your turn to Medusa an act of decolonization, an act of breaking with that history that we usually get from like this God that's supposed to be good?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I mean, I think about Medusa like I think about Kali. You know, the most powerful females that we have are these figures of destruction and also regeneration. And I just like that combination so much, that I hope that is a decolonizing position to take, that out of destruction can come some rebirth, that there can be something in that. Yeah.
From Hannah Johnson, are there any Rasta poets that stuck with you throughout your life?
Probably Muta Baruka. So not really a Rasta poem actually, but more of like a spoken word poem. But this is again later, not when I was growing up. The things that stuck with me as Rasta were hymns that we sang. So I actually wrote about one of these. I've never been able to find it written in a book, but I remember it because my memory for music is very strong. So I will remember things that are set to music. It's, by the way, how I got through my biogenetics test. I just put it to music. And I recommend it if that helps any of you ever pass something where you have to remember a lot of information. Music is a mnemonic device. But I just can remember them. So it was this hymn, the same one they sold into Egypt is the same one free them. I said the same one they sold into Egypt. It's about Jacob, the story of Jacob and the many-colored coat. So that's about as close as I can give you to like a poem, but it's really a song or a hymn. I don't remember. I remember things we would say. I remember whenever you would see somebody, you would say, I greet you in the name of, you know, our Lord and Savior, Haile Selassie, you know, who is known to be the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, conquering lion of the tribe of Judah. It's a little bit of a mouthful to say hello, but nonetheless, you know, like, I mean, I left when I was 9 and then I never went back again for 10 years. And we never spoke about it. So it's just, you know, it's like those ways in which memory would stay alive were being kind of severed in me. And so the only thing that stayed are these like sounds and images, sensory experience in that form. I don't have the ability to sequence it well.
I think we have time for one more question if
Sure.
you're game. Does anyone else have another question? Because I have a bunch, but I don't want to be greedy. I guess I have a question about, you said that when you, I'm not sure what state you moved to when you immigrated to the US. Did you have a place to go worship as a Rasta? And, you know, the US has such a strange viewpoint of like any of these type of religions that emerge from the Caribbean, like
Yeah,
Imo,
Santeria or
Yeah.
anything that's like, or voodoo.
yeah. So I'm wondering, how did you keep that connection?
Did you all freeze? I lost you for a moment. Did I freeze?
You froze for a second. Yeah.
Ah, sorry. I wonder. Okay, I'll turn off my phone just in case. I hope we can hang in there for this last question. I'm sorry. What I would say is, I was not sure where you were going with that, Eileen, but I was saying like Santeria or Voodoo or any of these other religions that are looked down upon, these syncretic Afro-based kind of Caribbean religions.
Mhm.
I did not continue practicing as Rasta though. That's a long story, but I have 4 religious traditions in my family. And so I moved through some of those is what I would say. I'm Jewish now. So if I can make you any more confused possibly in your understanding of how identities can be aligned in one body, I'll just say that to you. But I had a grandfather who was half Jewish, half Anglican, a grandmother who was Catholic. My parents were Rastafarian. And I am writing about this, but nonfiction, because it's just too complicated. In a poem, I'll write snippets of this and people will leave thinking, I don't understand who the I of this poem is, you know? They'll be utterly confused. Whereas in nonfiction, I can sort of say, well, this is how it works, you know?
Right. Right.
Well, thank you, Shara. Can you all unmute yourselves and clap? And we'll see how that, you know, can you hear? Yes.
And I'm kind of scrolling through my screens to see the beautiful faces that are on the screen. Thank you for doing that.
It's so strange to have these online readings and have everyone be totally silent, whereas in person we would hear shoes shuffling and chewing. Right, there
Thank you,
go.
Bob. I would have almost said we should just leave the mics off, but I do recognize you were recording and then you would have all of those background noises. But I agree. Thank you all for being here. It's late your time too, even.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shara, and thank you all for this adventure. And if you have any feedback for me on how I might make these Zoom readings go better, email me. I'm eager to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. We're brilliant all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.